I don't know about you, but I love that during the break we have this Twitter wall. So if you want to be famous and see yourself on the big screen, and on the live stream, I mean, if you're on Twitter anyway, it's because you want to see yourself or whatever. We keep on going with the amazing list of speakers. The main reason why I'm showing you the slides every time, which is nothing else than a screenshot from the website, is because I want you to know who are the speakers, because they don't have a special badge in like gold badge or whatever. And so I want you to speak with everybody, not only the speakers, obviously, really everybody. Yeah, let's move on to the next one, and to David, which was telling me just a couple of seconds ago. I was telling him, oh, it's funny, we could have written some random German words in your presenter notes, would have been funny. And he said, actually, can you tell the story yourself?
Yeah, I said after.
I mean, where's your microphone? Because I'm not hearing you. All right, say it again.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I was telling Stuff when he reached out to me about coming to speak, is I never been to Germany, never been to Cologne, and said, yes, I would absolutely love to. Then I think about 4 weeks into working on the talk, I had to look it up again and make sure that the talk was given in English and not in German. So it was that
would have been interesting.
Otherwise, a surprise.
Yeah. Learn German in like a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you learn a few words in German in the meantime, or not? Just a single
hello.
One? Just hello. That's a good start.
It's a great start.
But you really have to learn ein Kölsch bitte, which means a beer, please. It's the local beer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please giving a round of applause for David Hoang.
On that note, hello. As Stuff said, my name is David. I live in San Francisco, California. It was a pleasant surprise to see Jeff keynote, because I used to live in Seattle. So it only took us 8,000 kilometers to meet up. So what other better place than SwiftConf? So thank you, Stuff, and thank you, Seven Principles, for having me. Before I get started, I like to share just a little bit about myself, so you know like where I'm coming from, and I would love to get to know you after this too. So please find me. Questions along the way, more than happy to answer, but I'll make sure I get through this, so there's time for questions. So that is my cat. I don't know if you can tell. Yes, that is actually his own iPad. He is 11 kilos, so he might weigh more than all of Jeff's cats combined. And I'm actually going to be missing what's going to be his 15th birthday this week. So so a little bit about me. I actually studied visual arts in university. So I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to draw and paint and teach art. And then I took what's called a gap year, where I decided to take a year off before pursuing my master's. And I remember this was the year when I was debating whether I should get a Samsung Blackjack, if you remember those, or an iPhone. iPhone came out. There was this platform called iOS that nobody knew how to design for. So I said, you know what? Let's give this a try and see where it goes. And turns out, I think it was a good decision to not get that Samsung Blackjack. This is my childhood upbringing, essentially. So my father made sure, our family immigrated here from Vietnam, so they never had access to technology. So he wanted to make sure that my brother and I had such access. So we had the Amiga, we had Commodore 64, and of course the Apple II. So just some things that called out. If you remember Odell Lake, that's probably one of the classic Mac games where it was just a decision-based game where you're the fish and you need to decide, should I run away from the osprey or should I try and eat it? It really brought a lot of inspiration to me in a lot of the ways I think about building things. So I love visual programming. I'm a very visual person. I need to be able to see how things interact and what I'm working with. So this is a screenshot of still one of my favorite tools today, Quartz Composer. I hope Apple never kills it, but we shall see. But the most influential thing that made me want to start making software is Hypercard. How many remember Hypercard? Okay, a lot of show of hands. And that today, I still run a VM of OS 9 just so I can run Hypercard on my computer, is how much I love it. Here are some people who really influenced me. You may recognize some. I think when I talk about kind of the topic that I'm going to discuss, Brett Victor comes to mind a lot in his talk, Inventing on Principle, about being able to see the problems in real time and be able to get feedback and learn from it. There's other people up here, like Paola Antonelli. She is the VP of Design at the Museum of Modern Art. She talks a lot about programmers and designers being like policymakers and really like in the talks that we've heard today, having like a big stake in the ethics and how things are done moving forward. Bill Atkinson, the maker of Hypercard, of course. And then this gentleman in the middle is, you may know him. His name's Alan Cannistraro. He worked at Apple for a long time. And for those here, he ran the Facebook engineering team in the UK, became a great friend and mentor. And a lot of these things I talk about come from all these great humans that, whether I met them or not, have been like a really big influence. So this is how I describe my method of working, is I think the perfect harmony between making things, let's just say, in this case, we'll talk about software, is art and science where you get to use both the left and the right brain to create this sort of wonder. Before where I am now, which what I'll talk about next, I was director of design at Black Pixel, where we were a digital agency based in Seattle, but remote employees around the world. So we got to work with such clients as like Starbucks, New York Times, and a lot of other unnamed ones that we can't talk about. I did a lot of brand work at HTC too. That was a 1.5-year stint. So kind of thinking about how we tell our story and how we communicate our products. And I worked at a product marketing company called ExactTarget. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of like MailChimp, the email delivery service, but more focused on enterprise. So later got acquired by Salesforce because Salesforce acquires everything. Where I am now is a very special place, and it's a healthcare company called One Medical based in San Francisco. Healthcare is very complex, especially in the United States. It's something where not everyone has access to. And it's one of the top problems that the world and the United States is dealing with. At One Medical, we're focused on primary care. I'm not sure if that concept exists here in Europe, but it's similar to family care, or what we like to call cradle to grave care. So we have doctors that are basically like full stack doctors that know a little bit of everything, and it's kind of like the point person for you and your care. The unique thing about working at One Medical is that our product is the service that the humans give that are then supported by digital products. So when we think about how we make things, we start with people first. So we have 8 markets we're in. Seattle is the most recent one we opened in. Hopefully someday we'll expand outside of the US. And as I showed, we have 2 iOS apps and an Android app, and also a web app too. So we have our main One Medical app, which essentially lets you do things that you wouldn't ordinarily have to call to do. So you can book an appointment the same day. You can renew prescriptions on there. You can send messages to your doctors, or if you're not feeling well and you can't get out of bed, you can do a video appointment, which is very similar to like a FaceTime call in the app to be able to talk to someone and kind of figure out like what you might need next. This is the design team I run, and this is something I'm like very proud of and hope we can continue to do more work, is the diversity of this team. Is that not just from what we heard this morning, but also they all come from different backgrounds as well too. So we have Sin, she is the one dancing right now. She's formerly from IDEO and joined us. She studied computer science and animation. Stu studied photography, I studied painting. We often joke too that the one white woman we have actually has a Swedish accent. So we're trying to be as diverse as possible, because for us, and just hearing from Jeff's great talk this morning, is that we want all of our perspectives challenged when we think about empathizing for the user and kind of moving the business forward. We need perspectives that are much different than ours. So that is really, really important. So with that said, my talk is called Design Engineering with Swift and also Xcode. I do have a confession, and I don't know how many people realize this, is that I'm not an engineer. In fact, when I work in Swift, like in one of these talks, I'm the person who just puts the exclamation point in there to see if this will work. So I call it the Xcode dance, where you do the clean build and try and do the exclamation points to get it to work. So I'm not going to talk about design either. I think tomorrow Jessica's going to give a great talk about the collaboration between designers and engineers and how engineers can think more about design. This is design engineering. So think of it as one word. And what we're going to talk about are some opportunities that both designers and engineers have to work together and create some really, really cool processes in how we think about problems. So here's my little empathy session. I want you to raise your hand if you've gotten designs from someone where it doesn't consider the empty state. Raise your hand if all of the users on the avatars have perfectly cropped photos and all their names are Ava, so there's only 3 letters. Raise your hand if you've gotten designs at 2x on an iPhone 6 Plus, and there's no notes about what it looks like on the iPad and landscape mode and other size classes. Okay. How does it make you feel when you get it? Make you want to flip a table, perhaps? Yeah, so in this talk, we're going to go over what I mean by design engineering, and this is kind of my flavor of it too. The philosophy of it, the culture of the people you need in order to be able to run something like this, and then the process and the execution opportunities. So I'll share a couple of examples that we've been able to push far in design, but imagine if we had engineering like collaborating full-time with us on it. So again, I would love to hear some of these opportunities later on. So this is kind of a fake slide because this is the only talk in the track, so you have no choice but to listen to me talk. But if you did have a choice, it'd be for people who really love prototyping, collaborating and wanting to pair with designers, and just love hacking. And again, just building that relationship with designers who may have that curiosity to learn to code and really understand and empathize the hard work that it is as software engineering using Xcode and Swift. So, what is design engineering? There are kind of 3 pillars of design that people are talking about these days. So there's traditional design, which we're probably all most accustomed to. Line, space, shape, form, color, texture, layout, typography, how to make things kind of be both pleasing, readable, and usable. There's design thinking, which is pretty popular right now, which is taking design processes and methodologies to really like instill in your business or your company to come up with creative ways for brainstorming or strategies. There's a third one that we're going to heavily focus on called computational design. So what do I mean by this? Is that computational design is taking some processes that you would use in engineering to help solve design problems. Now, the term design engineer is not new in other industries. If you have any background in civil engineering, mechanical engineering, things that involve physical products, you're probably familiar with what a design engineer does. So the way I describe what a design engineer does is essentially if you have an industrial designer who's focused on the form of the object, doing different prototypes and renderings of how the object looks, you may have a design engineer who works with them and the engineering team and manufacturing companies to come up with the prototypes and like flesh out the functionality to make sure it works. Another analogy I use a lot too is like in film, there's a cinematographer who really talks about like how the compositions lined up, the colors used, and then there's a director too who talks about like just kind of seeing the overall flow of things. Does anyone know who this is? This is John Maeda. He's probably most famous for running the MIT Media Lab at MIT, and was the president of RISD. He's now the head of computational design and inclusion at Automatic, which is the parent company for WordPress. So John had this really controversial article in Wired where he said, if you're a designer and you want to survive, you better learn to code. And that was a very polarizing statement because there's a lot of designers who don't want to learn to code or they're intimidated by it. So he had this great quote that I wanted to pull that's when you can do both, you can do things that no one else can do. Technology companies that innovate tend to have these unique people. And you're probably thinking I'm going to say the U word, which is unicorn. And these people do exist, right? It's just not the expectation I would set for each individual, but it's kind of this, I would also argue that it could be a team of people. It doesn't have to be one person who comes with all the skills. If you can have multiple people act as one person, there's a lot of value in that too. So again, I'll kind of focus in on this line here, is that computational design aims to enhance that process by encoding design decisions using a computer language. So it's not programming, right? None of this stuff is going to end up in production, but it's going to help you inform a lot of the things that will end up in production. So these are some prototyping tools that designers like to use. This is kind of like a small facet of what I have my team use, but with the nature of this talk, we're going to focus on these two. Raise your hand if you've heard this question. This is my answer, is absolutely. I don't mean it in a polarizing way or in a condescending way, but the thing for me, with my background in art, I took a lot of sculpture classes. And the thing that I remember is if I was working in bronze or if I was working in plaster, I want to know how plaster works, how plaster reacts to the environment, right? What temperatures do you pour bronze? Code is no different. Code is the exact same way. So as a designer, I would encourage other designers and also the engineers in here to really share that importance with your design team. That's like, if you want to go deep and iterate faster, that's going to be a continuous theme. You need to just understand the materials as quickly as possible and as much as possible. So I'll talk about the philosophy that we use too. Code is not the ends to the means, but it's the human experience. As craftspeople and practitioners of code, I'm assuming we all want to write the best and most scalable code possible, but that's not the end game. The end game is what impact it makes on the human being that's interacting with it. So that's one of our core principles when we think about design engineering. Speed up the iteration cycles by reducing the number of steps in the process. This is a quote from a friend of mine, Izzy. We used to work together too, is that he said, the number one thing you can do to be productive is to reduce the iteration cycle. And that is so important. In fact, I have to be honest, I don't like the way the software development process works right now because it looks something like this. It's you have people, and a lot of times it's not the same people. It's people in an isolated room that are defining something, throwing it over a wall to then ideate, and then you do the wireframes, and then you do the interface design, you hand off, and then, okay, here you go, engineers, build it. Like, we thought everything through. But there's initial questions of like, why are we even building this, right? Or, you know, what problem are we trying to solve? Then it goes all the way back to this, and then you know, we see a lot of challenges with a lot of mishaps and missteps, and it's just too fragmented. I like to work in a way more like this, where you define and ideate together, design engineer, where it's really prototyping and working fast together, showing it to human beings and learning. And this is a continuous cycle until you get it right. That is, to me, like how software engineering should work. It's all the same people in the same room, solving the problems. designers learning about engineering, and engineers like understanding the genesis of the ideas. This is something we often forget too, is you make great design decisions with engineering constraints. I get very nervous when designers all just want to work blue skies, no constraints or no dependencies. That's very dangerous. It's appropriate at times, but I think the best designers will work with what they have. So I'm going to go back to Instagram. This was probably iOS 4. How many people were using Instagram during that day? You remember that the only photo size you could use is the square format. There was no video. There were very limited filters. This could be a brilliant and wonderful design decision, or it could be designing within constraints. So with Instagram just focusing on the 1:1 aspect ratio, they could ship faster and like get things out there and iterate more. This is actually a screenshot from their website. That's what it looked like. And then started adding on to it. And it actually created like a lot of, like, they found something where a lot of people are creating beautiful photos in this sort of aspect. So not trying to create too much scope, but figuring out what the constraints are and maximizing that. So anytime I hear constraints, like, I think those are opportunities, right? They're not things that are supposed to bring you down. We like to prototype to de-risk projects too. A lot of times there are big ideas and big unknowns, and the best way is to start building it and just seeing where you go. So I'm going to share a project that we did a few years back when I was at Black Pixel. It's called Inspirato. So this is a membership-based luxury travel company that's similar to like flash sales. So there's like every week you get different travel opportunities. You pay $20,000 US to join. So this is the sort of audience we're working with. So I've never gone. I did try to get the client to bring us to the Dominican Republic for user testing, but that didn't fly. So when we talk to the members, they're talking about search, and like that was the big feature we're trying to work on. And they're like, we don't really search. We just like talk to someone on the phone and just say, I want to go here. So I want to go to Bahamas with my girls, like for a bachelorette party, or I want to go to the Alps with my family and go skiing. So that is actually what resonated with people. So we wanted to create something a little bit different. This is going to be a little bit hard to see in the back. I apologize. So I'll kind of do a little commentary on what you're seeing. Is we wanted to build a UI that had a series of collection views that would pull from a database, and on that call, like return variant amounts of information based on what they chose, and do it all dynamically while animating. And I think the engineer I worked with wanted to murder me, and I don't know if I've talked to him since, but it's a big undertaking, right? And it's just like so much risk. Like, why are we doing this? We're on a tight timeline. Like, let's really think this through. So then we said, okay, let's start prototyping it. So this is the whiteboard photo that we came up with the engineers, saying like, okay, these are the main use cases. Do everything local, right? Just put in fake data and let's just see if this concept works. And we're going to show it to the client. And people were shocked because you're going to show a client like just basic like UI components and just and it's not going to look really, really polished. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. We want to prove the idea. Like, the main purpose of prototype is just to be able to convey the idea. Then it's gone. So I want to show you the prototype that Mikhail built. And it's quite amazing work, but it's just like, again, it's just local information, but it's just different ways to be able to select criteria. And it's like, I wanted to ship just that. Like, that was just amazing in terms of the implementation. But it built confidence for him to be like, I can do this. Like, this is a lot easier than I thought. Or like, it's a challenge that I'm willing to take on. Instead of throwing these ideas over the wall, and he has no idea of why we're doing it. So again, we showed the interviews, we showed the conversations we had, and he's like, I'm going to do this. In the end, it looks something like this. So I actually have a video of it in action. So this is a production build too. So I just want to show you how beautiful he made it. All of that started on that whiteboard. And it started with just moving forward and trying and seeing, is this something we can do? And again, it builds that sort of excitement where you as a team now are doing this together. It's not, you need to implement this because it's the next thing on the sprint plan, right? But it's really something that people can galvanize around. Talk a little bit about the culture. Again, remove as many steps as possible. This also means for us to use as few tools as possible. We still use Sketch, but we actually use storyboards and Xcode as the main way to build out layouts. So it's not going to be perfect. It's actually going to be quite bad if you look at it under the hood. But it's the same language, right? Kerning. Now, when we talk about kerning, when we talk about typography, it's in the same things. It's not beautifully rendered in Sketch, and then you have to finagle through it. So we try to keep a limited number of tool sets to prototype with, and everyone has access to the same tools. Again, rapid prototyping. So I like to find designers and engineers who like to move fast. And it's not fast in the sense that you're under pressure, right? But let's focus in on the most important things right away and see that to completion and learn from that. This was actually a watch that we 3D printed when the Apple Watch was announced, and we didn't have access to it for 6 months. So we said, why wait? Let's just 3D print one. We did paper drawings. I wore it taking the bus, subway, when I was carrying groceries, and started thinking about these sort of use cases. So again, prototyping is about moving fast. Most importantly for us, design works directly with engineering. So again, this is where we sit in the same room. Where I sit at One Medical, I sit next to the engineers. I don't sit with the other designers. We have a space to converge, so we want to be available. And again, it's important to work together, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, like whatever works best, but you got to be in the same phases together. So that's why you saw on that slide, I want just 3 phases, but everyone's involved in it. So there's that mutual understanding. You got to find people who want to build as part of the engineering process. You can't have people who are like, I need to completely understand everything before I even write one line of code or before I even start designing. You need people who are going to start moving forward. And that's how momentum gets built. And that's how you can start moving fast. So I'll share some of the process and execution opportunities here of some different ways that we've found to use. There's a lot more, but wireframing with storyboards. Instead of using Balsamiq, OmniGraffle, and some of these other tools to do wireframes, we actually just put it in Xcode. And it's very incomplete. But what you'll see is we can then put together a really quick tappable flow, so anyone can see what it might look like. And again, this is all real. This is all Xcode. We also have a rule too where you can't turn auto layout off, so you have to use auto layout. So it's something for us to learn too. And there's just these things that come up, like you saw the keyboard input use cases, right? Things that we would probably miss unintentionally in design, but by going through this, we are able to play around with it and see what's wrong. Pixar has this great piece on the 22 secrets to storytelling, or magical tips, one of those. But one is about putting things on paper. And they say, because you put things on paper, everything in your head is perfect until you start writing it down. I think wireframing and prototyping and working in Xcode's the same way. It's okay for it to not be perfect. You just want to get the idea out so it's tangible and everyone can see it together, and you start kind of refining it. There's no shaming in things being not done or incomplete. It's more about getting to a state of completeness, if that makes sense. Style guides. Raise your hand if you've gotten designs that don't match the style guide, or it's a new color or a new font class. Okay. We found a way to solve this, and we're still working on it, but it's actually building the style guide in Xcode. what we would love to push for this is actually make every component like IB designable and IB inspectable to start being able to play around with it together. That would be helpful for us to have everything IB designable and inspectable to be able to just quickly tweak, right? It's not so much the Brett Victor jumping game quick, but it allows us to really like think about these things. And the nice thing about this, you then have your button highlight states that often get missed, or you have like what the buttons look like. You can now see the constraints and see where objects relate to one another. This is Swift Playgrounds app. I don't want Xcode on the iPad, but I do love Swift Playgrounds on the iPad, and I like it because it's a great way to just start playing around with ideas and seeing how things look like. It's the equivalent of just grabbing a scratch pad and start sketching. So we rely on this a lot too. And a lot of things too is just playing around with objects like in isolation. So this is an example of a peek and pop prototype that I built. What we wanted to do was to be able to show, actually we didn't know what we wanted to do with it. We just knew that we wanted to defer and show more information at some point. So we're like, okay, let's just play around with peek and pop. And we don't know where it's gonna go yet, but we wanna get it to a state of completion and figure it out later. We build a lot of prototype apps too. So these are just apps to inform like decisions we need to make. Typography is a really big deal in terms of brand readability and just implementation too. So we had a couple of candidates for fonts that we were thinking of using. So instead of like asking engineering to change it all around and do extra work, we actually just built a little app that we could show like a view controller to certain people and have them play around with it. But there's also a filter where you can adjust the kerning and the leading of the font, so you can actually just see what works well. So then you can go back and look and see, all right, this is performed well with users, and go back to it and then actually work on it in production, or in the app that goes to production. This is a prototype that we built using CareKit, which was the framework that Apple announced, I think 2 years ago now. Again, we didn't know what the use case was going to be, but we wanted to start playing around with it. So being able to build things just to learn, right? No engineering time's ever a waste. Like anyone who says that is like, it's a shame they think that way. So anything that you learn, learning not to do too provides value. So that's what we try to encourage, is do things fast, throw it away, and learn from it. This one makes my engineers nervous, and it's actually building in the app. So one time I just created a branch and started working on the real app. And part of it was because we had this conversation around like this new area of the product that we wanted to introduce. And there's a lot of questions about how it might feel. So I told our team, let's just build it and see what it looks like. So everything's real except for this screen here. So when I tap into that, it's just static content, and it's just like old, it's just static table view cells, just to be able to convey the idea. Like, does this feel natural in like the current implementation? I am pretty deliberate about it, where it says like, do not merge, please don't merge. Like, so just so it's clear. But again, it's like referencing the real thing. Like, we try to get as real as possible, which is kind of an example of kind of the last thing I want to show, which is we do a lot of things called experience prototyping. And as I mentioned, like our product is around the human interaction. So this is Melissa, our service designer, who works in operations. And what we're doing is doing an experience prototype around the check-in flow of when you walk into the appointment. So we're trying different factors. Right now, you walk in and you say your name, your date of birth, because sometimes there's two John Smiths that come in at the same time, and your most recent address. And we really want to encourage privacy and just efficiency too. Some people don't want to say their date of birth. Like, you know, it's the people who turned 29 for like the last 7 years is they don't want to do that. So what we've actually done is been building prototypes. So this is probably like for an engineer, this is like where you create the magic for us, because this would have took me maybe like 2 months. So I had to learn AV Foundation. I had to figure out like how I would actually implement this. But because I worked with an engineer, we spent 45 minutes together, and he told me like, okay, here are some approaches you should do, or here's a starter like view controller for you to do this, and the IB stuff is on you. So all this is there's a common theme with QR codes recently, but this is an app where you would get a QR code presented via Passbook or Apple Wallet, forgive me, and or just in our app. And on the admin side, maybe there's an iPad, maybe there's they have an iPhone that they can use. We don't know yet, but they could actually scan and verify that it's actually you. And again, maybe that's generated in a unique fashion, so it's only like the one visit you have, so make sure no one else can use it. So basically all I needed was a view controller using AV Foundation to detect the unique identifier. So in the QR code, we just used the person's name instead of the website. So then it would just route to the specific view controller. And again, this was just through 45 minutes of collaboration. That's like, you just saved me so much work. And again, this is where I think the engineering part, design engineering, becomes crucial. So this is what we ended up building. And I think it took us like maybe a day to complete this. So you'll see I'll scan the QR code, verifies it's that person, and it gives a little message and information about them. And we actually took this like into the office and tested it.
Since you don't have it, I'll have questions. Okay. Hi, how are you? Checking in today?
Actually,
That's totally fine.
right? Yes. It's 128. Any changes to your insurance? Awesome. Yeah, I'll see yourself.
Oh, can you check on? Yeah.
So again, it's being able to build things, take it out in the field to actually validate it too. And the thing that was most important about this is that I think with prototyping, it's a lot like magic in how a magician has to create the illusion. If something gives it away, or then you're self-aware that it's fake, it kind of removes that sense of credibility. So that's why we had to build something real. So it's just like a flow. And those were the admins at the office. This is the office in New York. This is why it had to feel real for them. It's like something that they would actually have to use to like people who are sick that are coming in. So we ask questions like, is that an awkward interaction? Or is it something that, like, what can we continue to iterate on? Instead of building this, releasing it, and then realizing that there's a lot of unconsidered things where it's like awkward or then unintended consequences happen. So I want to end with this. See constraints as empowering, not restrictive. Be like, yeah, we got constraints and dependencies, right? This is going to be an awesome project. Yeah. Use code to creatively solve design problems and iterate with designers. Again, 45 minutes of, think of it as dog years maybe, like 45 minutes of engineering time is like 2 weeks of design time for us to be able to prototype. So I really encourage you. Relationships with designers might vary amongst all of you, but encourage you to really talk to designers and show like, hey, what are you working on? And seeing like, I can actually help you build this either myself or show you how to do it, to really just like amplify the team power in which this is something we talk a lot about, is that we're a pretty small team and we support a lot of people. So we say like, kind of like, when animals are in like a sense of danger, they kind of puff up and get big. We want to do the same. We want to amplify the impact that our team can make. With engineering, that's like a just huge injection of like amplification we can do. Build early. Like first time you step into a meeting, just start building. Like it doesn't matter what people think. Just start building and seeing where it goes, because you're going to need that sort of iteration to be able to see where it takes you. Yeah, be a champion for your designer on what is possible. Because I think for us, sometimes we think it's funny because the things we think that are too hard are actually really easy, and the things we think are easy, it's actually really, really hard. So like, just crash the party, walk into the design room, see what they're working on, and maybe brainstorm some ideas. Like, there's so many things that we can do in Swift and Xcode that can just help us learn together so much more. Are there any questions?
All right, questions? Well, let's start with a round of applause.
Oh yeah, thank you. So,
Thank you very much.
it's a hand over here.
I think I see about 3 million questions. So whatever, start with you.
So yeah, I think one of the big dangers of prototyping with your real tools is that you start hacking something to get it quick and dirty. Suddenly that's your project.
All of a sudden, it's in production, right? So the question,
So how do
yeah.
you prevent that from happening?
Okay, so the question was that sometimes when you're prototyping the real tools, I'm paraphrasing here, but there's a danger of prototypes just getting shipped into production, and all of a sudden, like a product manager or a stakeholder is like, "This is fine. Why are we spending more money on this?" And then everyone's mad about it. So what we have to do is we really have to enforce it, right? It's like putting things where it's like, do not merge, or just adding things in there where it just like, I mean, when I put my code in there, it's never going into production. So like, I know that's like a fail-safe there. But I think, again, that's a great point about the culture, is that you have to convey that this is a prototype and this is a learning thing, because there's going to be pressure to be able to just take the thing and merge it in. But it's kind of like us to really be protective of that, of like, this is just intended for conversation and learning, that it doesn't go into production. So. Any other questions?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the inspiring talk.
Oh, thank you.
I have one question. My question was like, do designers have to learn to code? What about the other way around? Like, do coders have to learn to design?
There's going to be a wonderful talk tomorrow about that. So it's like, yeah. So be sure to check out Jessica's talk. I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, I think for me, my perspective, yeah, it's like, look, it's like cats and dogs, right? Like fittingly so. In a different circumstance here is that engineers and designers just want to make things. They just want to ship, and they want, I'm generalizing, but they want it to go to the end user's hands. So the more that we can learn about each other's processes and infuse it together, it's just going to be huge benefit. The same way when I ask engineers, like, hey, I want to learn more about auto layout, like there's just this bright smile. They're like, great, I don't ever have to do it again. It's the same with designers too. So really understanding like why it's so important to make, like to have a custom font, or why is it really important to do this custom instead of using like what IB gives you. And it just builds a lot of empathy. So yeah, I highly encourage that, and make sure you watch the talk tomorrow.
And be sure to find someone who wants to learn auto layout for you.
Yeah.
Another one, not necessarily now. You can anyway speak with David now, because usually the one who starts the last talk starts by saying like, I'm the one between you and the lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And the one who's going to have the last talk today is going to be the one between you and the beer. So the lunch is ready. So let's go over there. But let's first start by giving David another round of applause. And thank you very much.
Thank you.